My name is Rose, and my world is measured in inches of calico and yards of denim. My shop, on the main street of Salvation's End, smells of lye soap, hot iron, and the faint perfume of ladies' fabrics. By day, I am the town's seamstress. My fingers, calloused and perpetually pricked, can mend the finest silk or the coarsest shirt. They call me quiet, observant. They see a woman hunched over her work, a needle rising and falling, a tiny silver fish diving through waves of fabric. They don't realize that in this stillness, I learn everything.
Silence is my shield, but my hearing is my sword. It's a tool honed sharper than any needle. I hear the whispered frustrations of wives, the boastful lies of cowboys, and the quiet, venomous negotiations of powerful men. My trade grants me an intimacy that a priest might envy. I handle the clothes that people live their lives in. I touch the very fabric of this town. And sometimes the fabric tells me its secrets.
Last week, it was Sheriff Brody, a man carved from oak and suspicion. He walked into my shop with a grim set to his jaw, tossing a dirt-caked shirt onto my counter. Torn in a scuffle, he'd grunted. As I was mending the ripped sleeve, my fingers brushed against a strange stiffness in the breast pocket. Carefully, I worked my smallest scissors and slipped out a small square of what looked like drafting paper. It was a fragment of a larger drawing, a few spidery lines, a symbol that looked like a bird's talon. It meant nothing to me. I carefully slipped it back and stitched the pocket shut.
Today, Mr. Silas Blackwood, the town banker, sent his errand boy with a finely tailored waistcoat. Mr. Blackwood is the opposite of the sheriff. Where Brody is weathered leather, Blackwood is polished mahogany. A seam had come loose in the lining. As I turned the satin lining inside out, my fingers again found something that didn't belong. A foreign stiffness, a familiar shape. My heart gave a strange, hard thud against my ribs.
I unpicked the stitches with trembling hands. There, tucked inside the cotton batting of the shoulder, was a small, folded square of paper. I unfolded it. My breath caught in my throat. It was the same thick, yellowed paper. The lines were different, but the style, the ink, the very feel of it was unmistakable. It was a perfect match to the piece from the sheriff's shirt. Another fragment of the same drawing.
I stood there in the quiet of my shop, holding the evidence of an impossible connection. Sheriff Brody, the pillar of the law, and Mr. Blackwood, the pillar of commerce. Two men who, in public, treated each other with a cool, formal respect. But in secret, hidden in the very linings of their clothes, they shared a map. My mind was racing, connecting threads I hadn't realized I'd collected. Blackwood's late-night visits to the saloon, Sheriff Brody's sudden rides out of town. This was a story told in ink and secrets, sewn into the clothes of the men who held Salvation's End in their hands.
The discovery changed my days. The rhythm of my sewing machine now sounded like a nervous heartbeat. I listened with a new intensity. I mended a dress for Martha, the barmaid. She mentioned closed-door meetings between Mr. Blackwood, Sheriff Brody, and her boss, a hard-eyed man named Corrigan. "Came in the back way," she'd whispered. I fixed a saddlebag for a prospector who cursed Mr. Blackwood. "That man's a vulture," he rasped. "Buys up claims for pennies, he owns half the land, but he still wants more."
It was during this week that Jedediah Stone came back into my shop. Jed was a regular, but not a talker. He was a pool of quiet. He'd bring in his work shirts with a simple tear, place them on the counter with a few coins, and say,
Whenever you have the time, Miss Rose. He had clear gray eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. There was a watchfulness about him that I recognized because I shared it. This time, Jed brought in a shirt with a long, nasty tear. I decided to take a risk. I imagine Mr. Blackwood keeps his men busy on those new ranches of his, I said, not looking up. I felt his gaze on me. After a long moment, he said, his voice low, "I don't ride for Blackwood." I dared to look up. "A wise decision, I hear." He spoke again, so softly I almost didn't catch it. "My family used to own that land." My hands stilled. I saw an old, deep anger in his eyes. "Blackwood?" I whispered. He gave a single sharp nod. Foreclosed. Sheriff Brody served the papers himself. The room suddenly felt very cold. Here it was. A common enemy. This was a man with a grievance as deep as my own newfound fear. I made a decision. It was a terrible, dangerous gamble. From the back of my shop, I retrieved the copy I had made of the map fragments. I had stayed up all night, painstakingly replicating both pieces onto fresh drafting paper. I returned to the counter and, without a word, slid the copied fragments across the worn wood toward him. Jedediah looked down at the paper. He studied the strange symbols, the intersecting lines. The spark of anger in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, assessing intelligence. He didn't ask how I got them. He simply recognized the significance of such a secret. "There's more of it," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I believe so," I replied. He carefully folded the paper and handed it back. For a long moment, he just looked at me, weighing the risk. "You're in trouble, Miss Rose," he said. "I know," I answered. "I plan to find the rest of it," I said, "before they do." A week passed. Jedediah appeared one night at my back door, a phantom in the moonlight. We spoke in low tones. "3 powerful men," Jed said. "The law, the money. There's usually a third, the muscle." Martha, the barmaid, she mentioned meetings, I recounted. Blackwood, Brody, and her boss, Slick Corrigan. Jed nodded grimly. "Corrigan. Runs the Golden Garter. He's Blackwood's enforcer. He's the rotten root that holds the other two together." It made perfect, sickening sense. The law, the money, and the muscle. But a man like Corrigan, a man who called himself Slick, might have a weakness. A man like that, I began, would care about appearances. "Fancies himself a businessman," Jed agreed. "Always wears a tailored suit." An idea began to form. "Mr. Abernathy, the tailor, is old," I said. "His hands shake, and his wife is my best customer." Jed looked at me, his eyes narrowing as he followed my thread of thought. "Accidents happen," I said. "People get sick, and impatient men need their suits." Our plan was simple but treacherous. The next morning, old Mr. Abernathy took a nasty fall. An hour later, his panicked wife was in my shop, and Corrigan's half-finished suit was on my table. I locked the door. I expected to find the map piece in the lining, like the others. My fingers, trained by years of work, searched every seam. Nothing. Panic began to prickle. I thought about the man. Vain, arrogant. I ran my fingers along the collar, and there it was. A faint, rectangular stiffness, tucked right under the velvet facing. My hands shook as I reached for my smallest seam ripper. I snipped the threads, peeled back the velvet, and there it was, the third piece. I worked with frantic haste, spreading it out next to my copies. It fit perfectly. The map was complete. It showed a route to a peak labeled Colmillo, the Fang, a lost silver mine. I quickly stitched the collar back together,
my work flawless. But a cold realization settled over me. Finding the last piece didn't just give us an advantage, it started a clock. The moment Corrigan realized his piece was gone, the race would begin.
2 nights later, Jed came to my door. "Corrigan knows," he said grimly. "They know someone has the full map." We were living on borrowed time. "We can't outrun them and we can't outfight them," I stated. "Then we have to misdirect them," I said. My shop had been my listening post for years. My target was Beatrice Miller, the town's biggest gossip. The next morning, I feigned distraction and leaned in, whispering, "2 men? A map? A Spanish treasure?" But they were talking about the old missionary trail, up north, near the Red Peaks.
Beatrice left my shop in a hurry. I knew that by mid-afternoon, Blackwood, Brody, and Corrigan would hear the rumor. Their own greed and paranoia would do the rest. That evening, Jed confirmed my hopes. It worked. Brody and 3 deputies just rode out. They headed north. It had bought us a day, maybe 2. We didn't wait for morning. Under the cover of a moonless sky, we packed light. Water, food, my copied map, and a few sticks of dynamite Jed knew of. We led our horses out the back of the livery, moving like ghosts through the sleeping town.
The Badlands were another world. The sun was a hammer, the cold a blade. Jed moved through this landscape with quiet confidence. During those 2 days, a bond was forged between us in shared peril. On the afternoon of the second day, we found it. A tall spire of rock that looked like a predator's tooth. Hidden behind a thicket of mesquite was a dark opening in the cliff face, the entrance to the Coyote's Tooth mine. Jed pried open a heavy, canvas-wrapped bundle inside. The lantern light caught the dull, heavy gleam of silver. Ingots! A fortune! It was then that we heard it, the clatter of hooves on rock. They were here.
"Confidence makes men careless," Jed said, his voice deadly calm. He handed me a stick of dynamite. "If this goes wrong, light this and run." But my plan was not dynamite. Not yet. From my sewing kit, I took a spool of waxed linen thread, incredibly fine yet almost unbreakable. I carefully tied it from a loose, precariously balanced timber to a rock, stretching it taut about ankle height just inside the tunnel. The voices grew louder. Blackwood, Brody, and Corrigan entered the mine, their guns drawn. Blackwood, leading the way, hooked his boot on my thread.
Blackwood grabbed onto the very support beam I had tied the thread to. The ancient timber groaned. It started with a shower of pebbles, then a grinding shift of rock from above. "It's coming down!" Brody yelled. Jed fired once, not at a man, but at the rock face, sending Brody stumbling backward. But Blackwood and Corrigan were too far in. There was a terrible grinding roar as tons of rock gave way. The sunlight was snuffed out. They were gone, buried under their own greed. We found another way out. We dragged a wounded Sheriff Brody from the rubble and left him with a horse. He would have a story to tell, but our names would not be in it. We didn't take much of the silver, just enough to disappear. As we rode away from Salvation's End, the rising sun casting a golden glow on the horizon, I thought about my little shop. I had spent my life mending other people's lives, but out here, with a quiet, steady man riding beside me, I was finally mending my own. The pattern was new, the thread was strong, and for the first time, the story was mine to sew.